Daf, Saldi Het, Amud Bet, line 4. Mar Shemuel. Hayman de Gazil Habitzad Tamr Mehaver. Someone stole a cake of pressed dates from his friend. Ve'itba Hamishim Tamara, there's 50 dates in that cake. Agav Hadadem Ezudim Benun Nachi Chada. If you would have sold them in one shot as a cake of 50 as a cake of dates, then it would have been sold for 49 perutot. But if you sold them as a set, it would have been 50. So sorry, if you would have done them separately, it would have been 50. In that case, if you stole from a private person, the thief pays him 49, as if he sold it in one shot. Like that, but for Hekdesh, Misham Hamishim, but if he stole from Hekdesh, the thief has to pay 50, as if Hekdesh would have sold it one at a time, and he has to pay the 20% fee of Me'ilah by Hekdesh, right? The 20% fee by doing Me'ilah from using something at Hekdesh. Now the Gemara says, Masha Enkim Mazik, which does not apply to someone who damages Hekdesh. The Lama Shalom does not pay 20% fee. The Amar more says, Ish ki yochal kodesh. When a person shall eat Hekdesh, that's when they pay the 20%. Parat Mazik explains that a person who damages it, that there's no 20%. So if he damages a cake of dates that belong to Hekdesh, he would be just have to pay it, not to have 20% fee. How come by a private person, a non-Hekdesh person, he pays him 49? The victim could tell the thief, I could have sold them one at a time for one each, and I could have made 50. By damages, by thieving, we see that by damages, especially we see that we go lenient for the guilty party, because we have this concept that if someone or animal damaged your field, so let's say it's a tomato field and the animal came down and destroyed 3 tomatoes. So yes, if you would buy each tomato separately, it'd be $2 each. But what we do is leniently for the antagonist is we measure we price estimate the field from before the damage and after the damage, which is much less. Let's say it's 30 cents on the dollar instead of $2 each. So that's why we see we're Mekil. The name of the Sfar Shmuel and Din Hidyot Lav didn't give Hadami. 1 second. So does that mean that the private victim is different halacha than the Hekdesh victim? But Mishnah elsewhere. Natal Eben Okora Hekdesh. Someone took a Hekdesh stone or a beam. Lama'al, he's not considered Me'ilah just by taking it. But if he gives to his friend, he's the one considered stealing from Hekdesh and his friend's not. He built that stone into his house or the beam. Loma is not considered stealing unless he lives underneath it for the value of the piruzayam. If he starts living in the house, that's considered benefiting. Said so that means someone lives in his friend's courtyard without that person's knowledge, he has to pay him a fee. So what do we see from here? From the fact that we learn from Hekdesh that it's considered benefiting from someone when you use it, not only living in there. Therefore, if you live in someone else's property without their permission, you have to pay them a rental fee. We see that clearly that we do learn Hekdesh to private person. So how come by our case we said it's different? No, Shmuel retracted from that halacha, meaning he doesn't learn that concept of living in someone else's courtyard. He retracted from that. He doesn't believe in it anymore. When it's okay, okay, who says he retracted from that Mishnah? Maybe he retracted from our Mishnah of the dates, meaning that maybe a private person will be the equal halacha as Hekdesh. The one says, "Lo, we know for sure retracted from the second one, saying that it's the same, and therefore we're saying that it's opposite." Hekdesh from Bet HaMikdash is learned towards from a person with his knowledge, meaning that the Mishnah teaches you that benefiting without the knowledge of with Hekdesh's knowledge, you cannot So we see from here that the Mishnah is talking that according to the Rav's explanation, that we see from here that the Mishnah is referring to that if you're benefiting with Hekdesh's knowledge, you can't apply that to another case of a private person without knowledge. So we see they're not comparable, like we just said. Okay, Marava. The guy who's transporting another person's jug of wine, and he broke it. Hey, if it was the market day where she could have sold more, he pays him 5 zuzim. And if it's any other day that's not market day, he doesn't sell as much, you have to pay him 4. If he returned the loss to the shopkeeper owner on the next market day for 5 zuzim, then it's okay. You just replace the barrel itself. You know, not the jug itself. He doesn't have to repay the money. At the end of the day, has to pay the 5 zuzim and not the barrel because that's only worth 4. That's only referring to when the shopkeeper had no other wine to sell. Because if he did have something to sell, then he could have sold that and he wasn't losing the full 5, he only lost 4. If he had all the wine to sell, he could have sold that instead. Obviously, if he sold out of it and did more, then yes, you have. And when you do pay him that 5 zuzim, you deduct the value of the labor that he would have done because he's not doing it anymore because it broke. And udme beradnaita, the cost of adding a spout or a spigot or a faucet to the barrel that he quote unquote saved him because he broke the barrel. So he gets to deduct that. New Mishnah. Hamahalif. Someone's exchanging my cow for your donkey. And then it gave birth. Someone's selling his shifcha Kanaanite woman and she gives birth. This one, the seller says she gave birth before I sold her, therefore the baby belongs to me. And the buyer says, no, she gave birth after I bought her, therefore the baby belongs to me. We split the value of the calf or the slave child. It was 2 slaves. One large, one small, the 2 fields. One big, one small. The buyer says, I bought the big slave or the big field. And the buyer says, I don't know. I don't know. The buyer can get the big one. The seller says, I sold you the small one. And the buyer says, I don't know. And the buyer only takes the small one. The person who's sure wins. The buyer says, I bought the big one. The guy, the seller says, I bought the small one. The seller has to swear that he sold the small one, and then the buyer keeps that thing only. And then finally, if they both don't know, they split it. So the Gemara says, how come in the first case we split it? In the case of the calf or the child, slave child, we don't know where it's born. We don't know when it's born. Yes, it should mind kind of see whose possession this animal or slave child is in currently. But I have an idach, and the other person shall be chayav to prove it because whoever the burden of proof falls on him. Meaning, if you have a only time we have yahloku is when when it's complete safek. But over here, if the child is born, calf or child is born in someone else's possession, that's automatically a point in his direction, quote unquote, and therefore the burden of proof will be on the second side. So how come we can't just check where he is? It says, the calf is standing in the public swamp. Nobody owns it. Also, the shifcha could have given birth where it was an alleyway or public area, and therefore also as well, it's considered neutral, and therefore nobody has rights to the property, and therefore he split it. Okay, that's okay. At least it should go according to the status of the first owner, the seller. I mean, we know for sure he owned it at one point, but the idach and the other person should have to prove it. He's trying to extract it, prove it. When I said no, Hamani Sumchusi, Damar, it's right. This part going to this mission is going to Sumchus. It says if you have an item that's in Safek, you split it. So the Quran says, Amor, Damar Sumchus, we know Sumchus said earlier in the previous case, for example, Bishama Bishema, right? We had with the case of the cows. With the borrowing and renting the different days a couple days ago. So we said some people said you split it when both are unsure, or like the last case in our Mishnah, both cases are both litigants are unsure. But in this case, they're both saying no, for sure I know, and for sure I know. How come we say? Would some people still say you split it? Right? Yes. He says that Rabbi says some people would still agree in the case of certain and certain. And not just Safek and Safek, that you still split. Rava says, when does Shimku say it? Only by Shema Safek and Safek. But by certain and certain not. Tani also, our Mishnah says as follows. How do you explain our Mishnah? This case of our Mishnah, Ze Omer Shema Lo Ashlo Machabti. This one seller says, maybe she gave birth before I sold her. and that's why it's mine. This one says maybe she gave birth after I bought her, therefore it belongs to the buyer. And because it's Shema and Shema, according to the Rav's explanation and re-explaining the Mishnah, that's why it's Achloku, according to the opinion. The Simchus only says Shema v'Shema and not Bari Bari. Tanan. Zelmer in the Mishnah said that this one said that no, but Zelmer I don't know. Achloku they split it. Bishlam makes sense according to the Rav, because the fact that the last case was a case of Safek and Safek, maybe and maybe. So the first case as well also was maybe and maybe. Simchus would say that even in the case of I'm for sure and you're for sure, the buyer and seller are both certain. Now, if the case would have been in the first case that the guy is saying I know for sure and you know for sure, and they still split it, why would you need a second case, the last case in the Mishnah where they're not sure? For sure you split it. If they already split in our first case in the Mishnah, and we're explaining it that it's certain and certain, according to the Bar of Huna, then why would Simchus need another case at the end of the Mishnah to teach you that you still split it when it's Safek? No, if you only mentioned the first part, okay, the last case, that's not an issue. It's not a good question because the last case of the Mishnah is clarifying the first case. Don't say that only Sumchu says you split it when it's in Safek. Maybe they're both maybes. Maybe you wouldn't apply by both certain. Therefore, the second case, I'll also bring a case of maybe. Which teaches you that the first case is where they're both certain, and even so, you still split it. Simchus would still say you split it. The two slaves. One guy says, I know, I bought the big one, the big slave, or the big field. I bought the small field or the small slave. The seller has to swear that he sold the small one, and the buyer gets that one. That you only split it by a case of Safek. But it doesn't say by you split it by certain and certain. That's why he has to swear and not splitting like Simchus usually says. Because he holds there's no Safek and Safek, they're both Bari. And the that you would split it even if they're both certain. Why would they need to split it? According to you, that Simchus says you split it in a Safek where they're both certain, this should be splitting it. Why is the seller swearing? We're going to see soon that Simchus would agree that if there's a swear shivua d'oraita, biblical shivua, you swear and you don't split it. And over here there will be a shivua because there's a moded b'miksat. The guy is a partial admission, and that's why. Okay. They had two slaves, one big, one small. So the Gemara says three questions. First of all, why is the seller swearing? The buyer claimed something, he didn't admit to the buyer. Right? Two different cases. One big slave, one small slave. I didn't agree to a partial of the claim. It wasn't you said 100, I said, oh no, only 50. That's not a partial admission, it's two different people. Whatever he admitted to the buyer, the seller didn't claim from him. But the second question, all right, so there should be no shavua because no modeling b'tzad. Second question, helachu. It's a case of helach. Helach means that here it is. I admitted to something. It's like similar to the concept. Like if you say I bought barley and I said no, I sold you wheat, or vice versa. That's a case of here is your wheat that I'm admitting that, right? We all agree that you could get this because I already admitted that I sold you this item. So there's also over here. I'm selling you. I sold you the smaller evet. Here he is. Helach. For additional case. And Mishbina we know that there's a certain halachot in Masechet Shavuot. There are certain things you don't swear on. Hekdesh, shtarot, and slaves. So how can you swear to the slave? Marav b'ta'anot. Oh no, really he's not talking about the actual slave, rather it's talking about money. Eved gadol. I gave you money for a big slave. All right, I paid you $1,000 for the larger slave. Pay me back, return me the $1,000. Or he gave him, and the guy says, no, you pay me $500 for the smaller slave. Same thing with this field. Shmuel says it's referring to not the money, but rather the garment. He bought a large garment or for a large slave, or a small garment for a small slave. Or for a field, he bought a large field's worth of grain. Or a small field's worth of grain. So the Gemara says, hold on, pause. If you're talking about grain is one thing, that's an amount. But a garment, again, we have the same problem. It's something completely different. It's A and B. this shirt or that shirt, the extra large or the small shirt. That's completely different. And the same, like we said earlier, two different avadim would be two different uh, uh, variables. And that's not something that has a partial admission to it. I admitted to something else completely, like wheat and barley. Where says no. We had a special answer that this garment can be talking about a singular garment. Because why? This type of garment is made up of smaller patches. I mean, it's patches of cloth made into a garment. So he says, I bought I paid you for a larger amount of patches, and you only gave me the smaller one, and vice versa. The guy's claiming I sold you for a smaller one, and he's saying, no, I bought a big one. So therefore, there is a partial admission because the garment is the same, but the amount of patches, the amount of cloth is the difference. Amen, amen.